Viking Earl grows weaker by the day, and no one knows why. His enemies watch closely, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But in the shadows of the great hall, a captive English woman sees what no one else does, and what she uncovers could change everything. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The year was 872, and the settlement of Ravensfjord lay nestled between towering cliffs and the cold, unforgiving waters of the North Sea. The longhouses stood proud against the harsh Norwegian landscape, their timber walls darkened by salt spray and countless winters. Smoke rose from the central hall, the largest structure in the settlement, where Jarl Eriksson ruled over his people with an iron fist tempered by wisdom earned through decades of raiding and trading across the known world. Inside the great hall, the warmth of the central fire pit fought against the bitter cold that seeped through every crack in the wooden walls. The flames cast dancing shadows across the carved pillars that supported the roof, their intricate patterns telling stories of gods and heroes from ages past. The scent of roasting meat mixed with the acrid smoke, creating an atmosphere that was both welcoming and oppressive. Along the walls, shields and weapons hung as testament to the settlement's martial prowess, each one bearing the marks of battle and the stains of victory. Jarl Eriksson sat upon his high seat, a massive chair carved from a single oak tree and decorated with the heads of wolves and eagles. At 40 years of age, he was a formidable sight to behold. His body was that of a warrior in his prime, muscles hardened by years of wielding sword and axe, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of his people's expectations. His hair, the color of burnished bronze, fell past his shoulders in thick waves, while his beard was braided with silver rings that clinked softly when he moved. His face was strong and angular, with high cheekbones and a jaw that seemed carved from stone. But it was his eyes that drew the most attention, pale blue like winter ice, capable of freezing a man's blood with a single glance or warming like summer skies when he smiled. Those eyes, however, had grown increasingly troubled in recent weeks. The Jarl shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a hand moving unconsciously to his stomach. The pain had started subtly, weeks ago, nothing more than a faint discomfort after meals. But with each passing day, it had grown worse. Now, even the smallest portion of food left him feeling as though his insides were being twisted by invisible hands. His trusted advisor, Ragnar Blackbeard, had noticed the change immediately. "My lord, you barely touched your meal again tonight," Ragnar said, his voice low enough that only Eriksson could hear. The older man's face was creased with concern, his weathered features speaking of countless battles survived and hard-won wisdom. "This weakness will not go unnoticed by the men." "Already there are whispers." Eriksson's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck standing out like cords of rope. "Let them whisper," he growled, though his voice lacked its usual commanding thunder. "I will not show fear over a stomach ailment. It will pass." But even as he spoke the words, Eriksson knew they rang hollow. This was no simple illness. The pain was too persistent, too deliberately timed with his meals. A dark suspicion had begun to take root in his mind, one that he dared not voice aloud. In the world of Viking politics, weakness invited challenge, and challenge often ended in blood. The hall was filled with his warriors, men who had followed him on countless raids across the sea to the lands of the Angles and Saxons. They sat at the long tables, drinking mead from horns and eating roasted pork and dried fish. Their laughter echoed off the wooden walls, but Eriksson could sense the undercurrent of unease. They had noticed his declining appetite, his pallor, the way he sometimes gripped the arms of his chair when the pain became too intense. Among those watching him most carefully was Bjorn Splitnose, his second in command and a man with ambitions that barely stayed hidden beneath a veneer of loyalty. Bjorn was younger than Eriksson by 10 years, strong and capable with a battle axe, and smart enough to know that patience could bring greater rewards than rash action. He sat at the table closest to the high seat, his eyes constantly flickering toward the Jarl, measuring, calculating. "Another successful trading season approaches its end," Bjorn announced, raising his drinking horn. "Our ships will soon return laden with silver and goods from the southern lands, all thanks to our Jarl's wise leadership." The men roared their approval, but Eriksson caught the slight edge in Bjorn's voice, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The Jarl raised his own horn in acknowledgement, taking the smallest sip possible. Even the mild mead sent a spike of pain through his gut, and he fought to keep his expression neutral. As the feast continued into the night, Ericsson's thoughts turned to the English captives who had been brought back from the last raid 3 months prior. Among them was a woman who had caught his attention not through beauty alone, though she possessed that in abundance, but through her defiant spirit and the intelligence that burned in her green eyes. Her name was Aylwyn, and she had been taken from a monastery on the coast of Northumbria, along with several monks and other servants of the Christian God. Aylwyn had been assigned to work in the kitchens of the Great Hall, preparing meals and serving the warriors. Unlike the other captives who had either broken under the weight of their new reality or sulked in silent misery, she moved through her duties with a quiet dignity that intrigued Ericsson. She was perhaps 25 summers old, with hair the color of autumn wheat that she kept bound in a simple braid. Her face was oval-shaped with delicate features that spoke of noble blood, high cheekbones dusted with the faintest freckles, and lips that remained pressed in a firm line of determination. Her figure, though clothed in the simple woolen dress of a thrall, could not hide her natural grace. She stood tall for a woman, with a slender but strong build that suggested she had not lived a life of pure leisure even before her capture. What drew Ericsson's attention most, however, were her eyes. They were the deep green of a forest pool, bright with an intelligence that no amount of captivity could dim. When she served him his meals, those eyes would meet his for the briefest moment, and in that instant he saw neither fear nor hatred, but a keen awareness that unsettled him in ways he could not fully understand. Tonight, as the pain in his stomach grew more insistent, Ericsson watched Aylwyn move between the tables, refilling drinking horns and clearing away wooden trenchers. She moved with economy and purpose, never rushing but never dawdling, her attention seemingly focused entirely on her tasks. Yet he had noticed over the past weeks the way her gaze would linger on certain things, the herbs used in cooking, the preparation of his meals, the comings and goings of those who had access to the kitchen stores. The feast was beginning to wind down, warriors stumbling off to their sleeping benches or out into the cold night air. Ericsson rose from his seat, and immediately Ragnar was at his side, ready to steady him if needed. The gesture was subtle, but not so subtle that it went unnoticed. Bjorn Splitnose watched from across the hall, his expression unreadable. "I will retire," Ericsson announced, his voice still carrying authority despite the fatigue that weighed on him like chainmail. "Ragnar, see that the watch is set properly. I want no surprises tonight." As he made his way toward the private chamber that adjoined the great hall, Ericsson caught sight of Aylwyn standing near the kitchen entrance. For a moment, their eyes met across the smoky expanse of the hall. Something passed between them, a moment of connection that defied the boundaries of conqueror and captive. Then she lowered her gaze and disappeared into the shadows of the kitchen. In his chamber, Ericsson lowered himself onto the sleeping bench with a groan he would never have allowed others to hear. The pain was worse tonight, a burning sensation that seemed to spread through his entire body. He lay back on the furs and stared at the wooden beams of the ceiling, his mind racing despite his body's exhaustion. Someone was poisoning him. Of this, he was now certain. The symptoms were too consistent, too perfectly timed with his meals. But who? And more importantly, how could he prove it without showing weakness to his enemies? In this world, accusation without proof was worthless, and proof required strength he was rapidly losing. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Enter," he called, his hand instinctively moving to the seax knife that never left his belt. The door opened slowly, and to his surprise, it was Aylwyn who stepped inside, carrying a clay cup that steamed gently in the cold air. She closed the door behind her and stood there, meeting his gaze with that same fearless intelligence he had come to recognize. "What is this?" Ericsson demanded, struggling to sit up despite the pain. "You should not be here." "I have brought you something for the pain, my lord," she said in surprisingly good Norse, her accent marking her as educated beyond what one might expect for a kitchen thrall. "A tea made from willow bark and ginger root. It will help." Ericsson's eyes narrowed. "And why would you, an English captive, seek to help the man who destroyed your home and brought you here in chains?" Aylwyn moved closer, her steps measured and deliberate. "Because I have been watching, my lord, and I have seen what others have not yet seen clearly. You are being poisoned, slowly and deliberately, and if you die, the chaos that follows will likely mean death for all the captives, myself included. We are bound together in this. whether either of us wishes it or not." The directness of her words stunned him into silence. Here was no cowering slave, but a woman of courage and cunning. She held out the cup, and after a long moment of consideration, Eriksson took it. The liquid was hot and bitter, but not unpleasant. He drank it slowly, watching her over the rim of the cup. "You know who is responsible," he said. It was not a question. "I have suspicions," she replied carefully. "But suspicion is not proof, and in your world, I understand that matters greatly. I need time to gather evidence. And you, my lord, need to survive long enough for me to do so." Eriksson set down the empty cup, already feeling a slight easing of the pain in his stomach. "Why should I trust you? You could be part of this plot yourself, sent here to finish what the poison started." A ghost of a smile touched Aylwyn's lips, the first he had seen from her. "If I wished you dead, my lord, I would have let the poison do its work unhindered. No, I have my own reasons for wanting you alive. Chief among them is that you are the only thing standing between this settlement and the complete rule of men who would be far less merciful to captives than you have been." She turned to leave, but Eriksson's voice stopped her. "This tea you brought me, you will prepare it each night and bring it to me yourself, to no one else. Do you understand?" Aylwyn nodded. "I understand, my lord, and I will find the truth of who seeks your death. This I promise you." After she left, Eriksson lay back down, his mind churning with possibilities. He had faced enemies on the battlefield, pirates on the sea, and rival jarls in the council halls. But this enemy worked from the shadows, using poison instead of steel. And his only ally, it seemed, was an English captive who had every reason to want him dead, yet chose instead to save him. Outside, the wind howled through the settlement, carrying with it the promise of winter storms to come. In the great hall, the last of the warriors stumbled to their sleeping benches, unaware that their leader's fate hung by a thread. And in the kitchen, Aylwyn began her careful investigation, knowing that one wrong step could mean death for them both. The game had begun, and the stakes were nothing less than life itself. The dawn broke cold and gray over Ravensfjord, the sun little more than a pale disk behind layers of thick clouds that promised snow before nightfall. Aylwyn had barely slept, her mind too occupied with the dangerous path she had chosen. She rose from the rough straw mattress she shared with 3 other captive women in the small outbuilding near the kitchen, careful not to wake them. The air was frigid enough to make her breath visible, and she wrapped her thin woolen cloak tighter around her shoulders as she made her way across the muddy ground toward the great hall. The settlement was already stirring to life. Warriors emerged from the longhouses, some heading toward the practice yard where they would spend the morning honing their skills with sword and axe. Others toward the docks where the fishing boats were being prepared for the day's work. The sound of metal striking metal rang out from the blacksmith's forge, and somewhere a dog barked insistently. Aylwyn kept her head down and her steps purposeful, playing the part of the obedient thrall even as her mind raced with plans and possibilities. Inside the kitchen, the fire had already been stoked to life by Ingrid, the head cook, a stout Norwegian woman with arms like tree trunks, and a face that rarely showed anything but stern disapproval. She looked up as Aylwyn entered, her small eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You're late," Ingrid grunted in Norse, her accent thick and her tone accusatory. "The morning meal needs to be prepared, and the Jarl will want his porridge soon." "My apologies," Aylwyn replied smoothly, moving immediately to the large clay pots where water was kept. "I will begin at once." As she worked, grinding oats between stones and preparing the mixture that would become porridge, Aylwyn's eyes constantly scanned her surroundings. The kitchen was a long, low-ceilinged room attached to the back of the great hall, its walls blackened by years of smoke from the cooking fires. Shelves lined one wall, holding clay pots, wooden bowls, and various implements. Along another wall hung dried herbs, smoked fish, and strips of salted meat. In the corner stood several large barrels containing grain, dried peas, and other staples. It was here, Aylwyn knew, that the poison must be introduced. But by whom? And how could she prove it without putting herself in mortal danger? She had learned much about the settlement's hierarchy in her 3 months of captivity. Jarl Eriksson ruled supreme, but beneath him existed a complex web of loyalties and rivalries. Bjorn Splitnose clearly hungered for power. That much was obvious to anyone with eyes to see. But was he acting alone, or were there others involved in the plot? And how was the poison being administered? The Jarl ate from the same dishes as his warriors, drank from the same barrels of mead and ale. Whatever method was being used, it had to be selective, targeting only him. "Stop daydreaming and focus on your work," Ingrid snapped, cuffing Aylwin lightly on the shoulder. "The Jarl's porridge must be ready within the hour." Aylwin nodded and bent to her task with renewed focus. As she stirred the thickening porridge over the fire, she noticed Ingrid preparing a separate, smaller pot. This was not unusual. The Jarl often received portions prepared with additional honey and dried fruit, luxuries that marked his status. But today, Aylwin watched more carefully as Ingrid worked. The older woman moved to the herb shelf and selected several bunches, crushing them between her palms and adding them to the smaller pot. Aylwin recognized most of them. Thyme for flavor, a bit of precious cinnamon that must have been traded from distant lands, dried apple pieces. But then Ingrid reached toward the back of the shelf, to a small clay jar that Aylwin had never noticed before. The cook glanced around, her movements suddenly furtive, before adding a pinch of whatever the jar contained to the Jarl's porridge. Aylwin's heart began to race, but she kept her expression neutral, her eyes focused on her own pot, as if she had noticed nothing unusual. Ingrid stirred the mixture vigorously, then tasted it from a wooden spoon. "There," the cook said with satisfaction, "fit for a Jarl. You, girl, take this to him, and don't dawdle." Aylwin's mind worked frantically as she accepted the bowl. This was an opportunity, but also a tremendous risk. If she delivered poisoned food to Eriksson, she would be complicit in his death. But if she refused or showed suspicion now, Ingrid might destroy the evidence or worse, accuse Aylwin herself of tampering with the food. "At once," Aylwin said, carefully balancing the steaming bowl as she made her way toward the great hall. The hall was nearly empty at this early hour, with only a few warriors still sleeping off the previous night's drinking. Ragnar Blackbeard stood near the central fire pit, warming his hands and speaking in low tones with two other senior warriors. He looked up as Aylwin approached, his eyes sharp and assessing. "The Jarl is in his chamber," Ragnar said. "He requested his morning meal be brought to him there. Knock before entering." Aylwin nodded and continued toward the chamber door, her heart pounding so hard she feared the warriors might hear it. She knocked softly, and Eriksson's voice called for her to enter. The Jarl was already awake, sitting on the edge of his sleeping bench and pulling on his boots. In the gray morning light filtering through the small window, Aylwin could see how much he had deteriorated. His face was gaunt, the strong jaw now too prominent, his cheekbones standing out like blades. The powerful body was still there, but she could see the way his hands trembled slightly as he worked the leather lacings of his boots. Their eyes met, and in that moment a decision crystallized in Aylwin's mind. She set the bowl down on the small table near the window, then moved to close the door firmly behind her. "My lord," she said quietly, her voice urgent, "do not eat this porridge." Eriksson's expression hardened immediately, his hand moving to the knife at his belt even as he struggled with the weakness that plagued him. "Explain yourself, quickly." "I watched the cook, Ingrid, prepare this meal," Aylwin said, the words tumbling out rapidly. She added something from a jar hidden at the back of the herb shelf, something she did not want anyone to see her use. She was careful, secretive. "My lord, I believe this is how the poison is being administered." The Jarl stood slowly, his impressive height making Aylwin take an instinctive step backward. Even weakened, he was a formidable presence. He moved to the table and looked down at the porridge, his jaw working as he considered her words. "Ingrid has served my household for 15 years, he said finally. "She was loyal to my father before me. Why would she turn traitor now? Perhaps she has been paid well," Aylwin suggested carefully. "Or perhaps she has been threatened. Or perhaps her loyalty lies not with you, but with someone who seeks to replace you." Eriksson's eyes flashed with anger, but Aylwin could see that it was not directed at her. He was a warrior, trained to assess threats and make quick decisions in battle. She could almost see him applying that same tactical thinking to this new kind of warfare. "The jar," he said abruptly. "Can you retrieve it without raising suspicion?" Aylwin considered this carefully. "Perhaps. But if Ingrid realizes it is missing, she will know someone suspects her. That could force her confederates to act more quickly or more desperately. Then we need proof that cannot be denied," Eriksson said, beginning to pace despite the obvious pain the movement caused him. "Proof that will expose not just Ingrid, but whoever is behind this plot." A plan was forming in Aylwin's mind. Dangerous, but potentially effective. My lord, what if you appear to grow worse? If your enemies believe the poison is working faster, they may become overconfident. They may make mistakes, reveal themselves more openly. Erickson stopped pacing and looked at her with new respect. You would have made a good strategist had you been born a man in my culture. I had a good teacher, Elwyn said, a flash of pain crossing her features. My father was a thane in Northumbria, advisor to the local lord. He taught me that patience and observation often achieve what force cannot. Had? Erickson asked, his voice softening slightly. He died defending the monastery when your raiders came, Elwyn said, meeting his eyes without flinching. He was a good man, a faithful man, and he deserved a better death than he received. For a long moment, silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of all that could not be changed. Then Erickson nodded slowly. I cannot give you back your father or your former life, but I can promise you this. Help me survive this treachery. Help me expose those responsible, and you will have your freedom. I swear this on my honor as Jarl. Aylwyn felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of grief and anger she had carried since her capture. This man was still her captor, still the reason her world had been destroyed. But he was also a man of honor, facing death by treachery, and she found that she could not simply stand by and watch him die, regardless of the past. Then we have an agreement, my lord, she said, but we must be careful. If Bjorn Splitnose is behind this, and I believe he is, then he will have allies throughout the settlement. We can trust no one completely except each other. An English captive and a Viking Jarl, unlikely allies indeed, Erickson said, and for the first time in weeks, something like a smile touched his lips. Very well, Elwyn of Northumbria. We will play this game together. Now tell me exactly what you saw in the kitchen, every detail, no matter how small it seems. As Aylwyn recounted her observations, describing the jar, Ingrid's furtive behavior, and the layout of the kitchen, Erickson listened with the focused intensity of a warrior planning a battle. Outside the chamber, the settlement continued its daily routines, unaware that in this small room, an alliance was being forged that would determine the fate of them all. When Elwyn finished her account, Erickson moved to the table and picked up the bowl of porridge. He carried it to the window and dumped it outside, where the dogs would likely consume it before anyone noticed. From now on, he said, you will prepare all my meals personally. Tell Ingrid that I have developed a particular preference for food prepared by English hands, that it reminds me of my raids in your homeland. She will not question this. Jarls are allowed their eccentricities. And the tea I brought you last night? Aylwyn asked. Continue to bring it each evening, Erickson confirmed. It helped considerably. Whatever healing knowledge you possess, I have need of it now. My mother was a healer, Aylwyn explained. Before she died, she taught me the properties of herbs and plants, which could cure and which could kill. That knowledge is what first made me suspect poison rather than natural illness. Erickson studied her with new appreciation, seeing not just a beautiful woman, but an intelligent and capable ally. Then perhaps the gods brought you here for a reason, though neither of us could have guessed what it would be. Elwyn did not respond to this, her Christian faith making it impossible to accept that the Norse gods had any role in her fate. But she understood what he meant, the sense that sometimes events conspired to bring people together in ways that defied simple explanation. I should return to the kitchen, she said. My absence will be noticed. What shall I tell Ingrid about the empty bowl? Tell her I consumed it eagerly and wish for more at the midday meal, Erickson said. Let her think her poison is working well. Meanwhile, I will make a show of growing weaker. By tomorrow, I want rumors spreading through the settlement that the Jarl is dying. That should draw our enemies into the open. Elwyn nodded and moved toward the door, but Erickson's voice stopped her once more. Elwyn, he said, his tone serious, you understand the danger you have placed yourself in? If Bjorn or his allies suspect what you are doing, they will not hesitate to kill you. I understand, my lord, Aylwyn replied, turning to face him. But I have been in danger since the moment your ships appeared on our coast. At least now I have some control over my fate, small though it may be. As she left the chamber and made her way back to the kitchen, Aylwyn felt the weight of the choice she had made settling onto her shoulders. She was no longer simply a captive waiting for rescue or death. She was now an active player in a deadly game of power and poison. And somehow, despite everything, she found that she welcomed the challenge. For too long she had been passive, allowing events to carry her along like driftwood on the tide. Now, finally, she had a purpose again. In the kitchen, Ingrid looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. "Well?" the cook demanded. "Did the Jarl enjoy his meal?" "He consumed every bit," Elwyn lied smoothly. "And he has requested that I prepare his meals from now on. He says the English methods of cooking remind him of his successful raids and bring him good fortune." Ingrid's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Elwyn feared the woman would object. But then the cook shrugged, her thick shoulders rising and falling. "Jarls have their whims. Very well, you will prepare his food. But it must meet my standards, or you will feel my displeasure." "Of course," Elwyn said humbly, hiding the surge of triumph she felt. She had gained control over Ericsson's food, which meant she could ensure he received no more poison. But she had also made herself a target. If Ingrid was indeed part of the plot, the woman would now be watching Elwyn's every move. The game had entered its next phase, and the stakes continued to rise with each passing moment. 3 days passed, and with each one, Jarl Ericsson's performance as a dying man became more convincing. He had always been a shrewd leader, and now he applied that same cunning to the art of deception. He moved through the great hall with visible effort, his powerful frame seeming to diminish before the eyes of his warriors. He ate sparingly in public, pushing away plates that Elwyn had carefully prepared to be nutritious despite appearing meager. He dismissed council meetings early, claiming exhaustion, and most tellingly, he allowed Ragnar Blackbeard to take over many of the daily decisions that normally fell to the Jarl himself. The effect on the settlement was immediate and profound. Warriors who had served Ericsson for years gathered in small groups, their voices low and worried. The traders who relied on the Jarl's protection for their ventures began to make contingency plans, and Bjorn's split nose grew bolder with each passing day. Elwyn watched it all from her position in the kitchen, her eyes and ears constantly alert for any sign of conspiracy. She had been careful to maintain her role as a simple thrall, head bowed and voice soft, even as she gathered information like a spider spinning its web. The other captives assumed she had simply found favor with the Jarl through her cooking skills, and the Norse women who worked in the hall treated her with the casual disdain they showed all English prisoners. But at night, when she brought Ericsson his healing tea, they spoke freely. These meetings had become the anchors of both their days, moments of truth in a world built on deception. The Jarl's chamber, lit only by a single oil lamp, became a sanctuary where conqueror and captive could set aside their roles and simply be two people fighting for survival. On the third night, as Ericsson drank his tea and Aylwin prepared to leave, he reached out and gently caught her wrist. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through her arm, and she looked up to find his ice-blue eyes studying her with an intensity that had nothing to do with illness or conspiracy. "Stay a moment longer," he said, his voice quiet. "I would speak with you about something beyond poison and plots." Aylwin hesitated, very aware of his hand on her wrist, of the impropriety of being alone with him in his chamber. But she also recognized the loneliness in his expression, the isolation that came from being a leader who could trust no one. Slowly she sat down on the wooden stool near his sleeping bench. "What would you speak of, my lord?" she asked. Ericsson released her wrist and leaned back against the wall, the flickering lamplight casting shadows across his strong features. "Tell me about your life before the raid. What was Aylwin of Northumbria like when she was free?" The question caught her off guard. In the 3 months since her capture, no one had asked about her past, had cared about who she had been before becoming a thrall. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it down and began to speak. "I was the daughter of Godwin, Thane of Linsworth," she said, her voice soft with memory. "My mother, Elswith, died when I was 12 summers old, and after that, my father raised me more as a son than a daughter. He taught me to read and write in both English and Latin, to understand the management of lands and people. He said that knowledge was a weapon sharper than any sword, and that a sharp mind could survive where a strong arm might fail. He was a wise man," Ericsson observed. "You speak Norse well for someone captured only months ago." "I learned it from traders who came to our coast," Aylwin explained. "My father believed it was foolish to ignore the language of one's enemies. He said that understanding how they think and speak was the first step to defending against them." She paused, a bitter smile touching her lips, though in the end, even that knowledge was not enough. Ericsson was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I led that raid," he said finally. I gave the orders that destroyed your home and killed your father. Does it not fill you with hatred to sit here with me now, to work to save my life?" Elwyn met his gaze directly, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I will not lie to you, my lord. When I first saw you in this hall, when I first understood who you were, I did hate you. I imagined 1,000 ways you might die, each more painful than the last. But hatred is a fire that consumes the one who carries it, and I found that I could not sustain it without destroying myself." She stood and walked to the small window, looking out at the dark settlement beyond. "My father used to say that we cannot choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond. I could remain trapped in hatred and grief, or I could look forward and find some purpose in this new life I have been forced to accept. When I realized you were being poisoned, when I understood that I had the knowledge to help you, I made a choice, not because I have forgiven what was done, but because I refused to let circumstances turn me into someone my father would not recognize." Erickson rose from the sleeping bench and moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body in the cold chamber. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "In all my years of raiding and trading across the northern seas, I have never met a woman quite like you. Strong, intelligent, unbowed by fate. If circumstances were different, if we had met some other way." He left the thought unfinished, but Aylwin understood what he meant. She felt it too, this strange connection growing between them despite everything that should have kept them apart. It was dangerous and impossible, a betrayal of everything she should hold dear. And yet, she could not deny the pull she felt toward this man who was at once her captor and her partner in survival. "Circumstances are what they are, my lord," she said softly, turning to face him. "We can speak of what might have been in other times, other lives, but we must live in this one." Their faces were close now, close enough that Elwyn could see the flecks of darker blue in his pale eyes, could count the individual hairs in his bronze beard. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they stood frozen, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Erickson stepped back, his warrior's discipline reasserting itself. "You are right, of course," he said, though his voice carried an edge of regret. "And we have more immediate concerns. Tomorrow Bjorn has called for a gathering of all the senior warriors. He claims it is to discuss preparations for winter, but Ragnar believes it is a pretext to question my fitness to rule." Aylwyn's mind immediately shifted back to the practical matters at hand, though her heart still beat faster than it should. "Will you attend?" "I must," Erickson replied, moving back to his sleeping bench and sitting heavily. "If I refuse, it will be seen as confirmation of my weakness. But I will make sure to appear as ill as possible, to encourage Bjorn's overconfidence. The more secure he feels, the more likely he is to make a mistake." "What would you have me do?" Aylwyn asked. Erickson considered this carefully. "Continue as you have been. Prepare my meals, tend to my health, and keep your eyes and ears open. But also, try to get closer to Ingrid if you can. Find out who gives her orders, where that jar of poison came from. We need solid proof before I can make accusations." "That will be difficult," Aylwyn said thoughtfully. "Ingrid trusts no one, least of all an English captive. But perhaps I can befriend one of the other kitchen workers, someone who might have seen or heard something useful." "Be careful," Erickson warned. "If Bjorn suspects you are working against him, he will have you killed without hesitation. Your status as my favorite cook will not protect you." "I understand the risks, my lord," Aylwyn assured him, "but I have come too far to turn back now. Besides, you gave me your word that I would have my freedom if we succeed. That promise is worth any danger." After she left, Erickson lay back on his furs and stared at the ceiling, his thoughts a tangled mix of strategy and emotion. He had led men into battle, had made life-and-death decisions that affected entire settlements, had negotiated with kings and jarls across the known world. But he had never felt as uncertain as he did now, balanced on the knife's edge between survival and destruction, between duty and desire. Aylwyn was supposed to be a means to an end, a tool to help him uncover the conspiracy against him. But somewhere in their nightly conversations, in the quiet moments when she tended his illness and shared her story, she had become something more. He found himself thinking about her during the day, wondering what she was doing, whether she was safe. He looked forward to their evening meetings with an anticipation that had nothing to do with strategy or survival. This was dangerous territory, and Erickson knew it. She was his captive, a woman whose life he had destroyed, and any relationship between them was built on the most unstable of foundations, and yet he could not deny what he felt, could not ignore the way his heart lifted when she entered his chamber, the way her smile, rare as it was, seemed to brighten even the darkest moments. The following morning dawned bright and bitterly cold, the first snow of winter dusting the settlement in a thin layer of white. Eriksson rose early, carefully arranging his appearance to suggest a man at the edge of death. He left his hair unbraided, allowed his beard to remain unkempt, and dressed in clothes that hung more loosely on his frame than they had weeks before. When he emerged from his chamber, supported by Ragnar's arm, the gasps and worried murmurs from the warriors confirmed that his performance was effective. The gathering took place in the great hall, with all the senior warriors seated at the long tables. Bjorn Splitnose had positioned himself prominently, his confidence evident in every gesture and expression. He had dressed in his finest clothes, a tunic of deep blue wool decorated with silver thread, and wore his weapons openly, a statement of power that was not lost on anyone present. Eriksson took his place in the high seat, though even this simple act required visible effort. Elwyn stood near the kitchen entrance, ostensibly waiting to serve if needed, but her attention was focused entirely on the proceedings. She noticed how Bjorn's eyes constantly flickered toward the Jarl, measuring, calculating. She also noticed Ingrid watching from the kitchen doorway, her expression unreadable but her presence suspicious. Why would a cook attend a warrior's council unless she had a specific interest in its outcome? "My friends," Bjorn began, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "we gather today to speak of winter preparations, but I think we must also address the matter that weighs on all our minds. Our Jarl is ill, gravely so. We can all see it, and while we hope for his recovery, we must also plan for the possibility that he may not survive the winter." A murmur ran through the assembled warriors, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncomfortable at such direct speech. Ragnar Blackbeard stood, his weathered face tight with anger. "The Jarl still leads us," Ragnar said firmly. "He is weakened by illness, yes, but he is far from dead. This talk of succession is premature and disrespectful." "Is it?" Bjorn countered smoothly. "Look at him, Ragnar. When was the last time he could wield his sword for more than a few minutes? When did he last join us in the practice yard? A Jarl must be strong, must be able to defend his position with steel if necessary. How can Eriksson do this when he can barely stand without support?" Eriksson listened to this exchange with apparent indifference, his eyes half closed as if the effort of sitting upright was almost too much. But inside, his mind was working furiously, cataloging every detail, every supporter who nodded at Bjorn's words, every loyal warrior who looked ready to defend their Jarl. "Strength returns," Eriksson said finally, his voice deliberately weak. "I have faced worse than this illness. I will recover." "Of course, my Jarl," Bjorn said, his tone respectful but his eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph. "We all hope for this, but in the meantime, perhaps it would be wise to appoint a temporary war leader, someone who can make the quick decisions necessary for our defense, should we be attacked while you convalesce." This was the play, Elwyn realized. Bjorn was not yet bold enough to challenge Eriksson directly, but he was maneuvering to gain control of the warrior's loyalty. Once he held that power, disposing of a weakened Jarl would be simple. Before Eriksson could respond, one of the other senior warriors, a grizzled veteran named Tormund Oakshield, stood. "I will not support this," he said bluntly. "Eriksson has led us well for 10 years. One illness does not erase a decade of successful leadership. I say we wait until spring. If the Jarl has not recovered by then, we can revisit this discussion." Several other warriors voiced their agreement, and Elwyn saw Bjorn's jaw tighten with frustration. The vote was not going as he had planned. He needed Eriksson weaker, more obviously incapacitated, before the warriors would accept a change in leadership. "Very well," Bjorn said, forcing a smile. "We will table this discussion for now, but I ask that we all keep the settlement's best interests in mind. Our survival depends on strong leadership, whoever that may come from." As the gathering dispersed, Elwyn caught Bjorn speaking quietly with Ingrid near the kitchen entrance. She could not hear their words, but their body language told her everything she needed to know. Ingrid was receiving instructions, and from the way she kept glancing toward the kitchen, Elwyn suspected those instructions involved increasing the dosage of poison. Bjorn needed Eriksson to deteriorate faster if his plan was to succeed. That night, when Elwyn brought the healing tea to Eriksson's chamber, she found him standing by the window despite his exhaustion, his expression troubled. "Bjorn will move against you soon," she said without preamble. He expected the warriors to support him today, and when they did not, I saw murder in his eyes. He spoke with Ingrid after the meeting. "I believe he has ordered her to increase the poison. Let him try," Eriksson said grimly. "You control my food now. He can order whatever he likes, but his poison will never reach me." "But we still have no proof," Elwyn pointed out. "Without evidence, you cannot move against him, and every day we wait gives him more time to plan." Eriksson turned to face her, and in the lamplight, she could see the warrior he still was beneath the performance of illness. "Then we must force his hand," he said. "Tomorrow I will send Ragnar to announce that I am near death, that I wish to name my successor before I pass. That should bring Bjorn and his conspirators out into the open. They will want to be sure I die before I can name someone else as my heir." "That is incredibly dangerous," Elwyn protested. "If they believe you are dying anyway, they might simply kill you outright rather than wait for poison to do its work." "Perhaps," Eriksson acknowledged, "but sometimes the only way to win is to risk everything on a single throw of the dice. Besides, I will not be unprotected. Ragnar will have loyal warriors watching my chamber at all times, and you will be here, will you not?" "Of course," Elwyn said immediately, then paused, realizing what she had committed to. She would be putting herself directly in the path of danger, making herself a target for anyone who wanted Eriksson dead. But when she looked at him, at this strong, intelligent man, who had somehow become so important to her despite everything, she knew she could not do otherwise. "Then it is settled," Eriksson said. "Tomorrow we spring the trap, and may the gods grant us the wisdom to survive what follows." The announcement of Jarl Eriksson's impending death sent shockwaves through Ravensfjord, like a stone thrown into still water. Ragnar Blackbeard had delivered the news at midday, his voice heavy with emotion that was only partly feigned. The Jarl, he proclaimed, had grown so weak that he could barely rise from his bed. He had requested that the senior warriors gather at sunset to hear his final wishes and learn who he would name as his successor. From her position in the kitchen, Elwyn watched the settlement transform. Warriors who had seemed uncertain before now moved with purpose, choosing sides in the conflict they knew was coming. Some gravitated toward Bjorn's split nose, attracted by his youth and strength. Others remained loyal to Eriksson's memory and gathered around Ragnar and Tormund Oakshield. The air itself seemed charged with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Ingrid had been unusually agitated all morning, her small eyes constantly darting toward the great hall, her thick hands fumbling with tasks she normally completed with ease. When one of Bjorn's men entered the kitchen and spoke quietly with her, Elwyn positioned herself close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. "Tonight, must be certain. No mistakes this time." The warrior's voice was low and urgent. "I understand," Ingrid replied, her accent even thicker than usual in her nervousness. "It will be done. He will not live to name his heir." The warrior left, and Ingrid stood still for a moment, her broad shoulders rising and falling with deep breaths. Then she moved to the herb shelf with sudden determination, reaching for that hidden jar Elwyn had observed before. This time, however, the cook took no precautions to hide her actions. She was beyond caring about subtlety, focused only on completing her deadly task. Elwyn felt her heart racing as she watched Ingrid prepare a special cup of mead, one clearly intended for the Jarl's final gathering. The cook added honey to mask any bitterness, then carefully measured out a quantity of powder from the jar that was far larger than any dose she had used before. This was not meant to sicken gradually. This was meant to kill quickly and certainly. "Girl!" Ingrid barked suddenly, making Elwyn jump. "Come here!" Elwyn approached cautiously, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. Ingrid thrust the cup toward her, the mead sloshing slightly with the force of the movement. "Take this to the Jarl's chamber," the cook ordered. "Tell him it is a special blend to give him strength for the evening's gathering. Make sure he drinks it all before the warriors arrive." This was it, the moment of ultimate danger. If Elwyn took the cup, she would be carrying poison directly to Eriksson. If she refused, she would reveal that she knew too much and likely be killed before she could warn anyone. Her mind worked frantically, searching for a solution. "Of course," she said, taking the cup with steady hands despite the fear coursing through her. I will deliver it at once. She turned and walked toward the great hall, very aware of Ingrid's eyes boring into her back. Once she passed through the doorway and out of the cook's sight, Elwyn allowed herself a moment to think. The hall was busy with preparations for the evening gathering, warriors moving benches and tables, thralls laying fresh rushes on the floor. No one paid attention to one English captive carrying a cup. Elwyn moved swiftly to Ericsson's chamber and knocked urgently. When his voice called for her to enter, she slipped inside and closed the door firmly behind her, leaning against it as if she could physically bar the danger that pursued them. Ericsson was dressed in his finest clothes, preparing for the performance that would hopefully expose his enemies. He wore a tunic of deep red wool, embroidered with gold thread and patterns that spoke of wealth and power. His hair had been carefully braided, his beard trimmed and oiled. Despite the weeks of apparent illness, he had somehow managed to present himself as a jarl worthy of respect. Only his eyes, shadowed with genuine fatigue, betrayed the toll this deception had taken. "What is it?" he asked, seeing her expression. "What has happened?" "Ingrid sent this," Elwyn said, holding up the cup. "She told me to make sure you drink it all before the gathering. My lord, this is no gradual poison. She added enough to kill you within minutes." Ericsson's expression hardened, the warrior emerging fully through the mask of illness. "Then Bjorn plans to make his move tonight. He wants me dead before I can name my successor, and he wants it to look like natural death, the final failure of a sick man's heart. We need to preserve this," Elwyn said, looking around the chamber for a suitable container. "This is our proof. If we can show the warriors that you were being poisoned, if we can connect it to Bjorn and Ingrid—" "It may not be enough," Ericsson interrupted, his tactical mind already working through the possibilities. "Bjorn will simply claim he knew nothing of it, that Ingrid acted alone. Without proof of his involvement, the warriors will be divided, and division leads to civil war. Then we must make him reveal himself," Elwyn said, her own mind racing now. "What if you appeared to drink this? What if you collapsed during the gathering, as if the poison had done its work? Bjorn would have to show his hand then, to claim leadership before anyone else could act." Ericsson studied her for a long moment, and she could see him evaluating the plan, finding its strengths and weaknesses. "It is risky," he said finally. "If Bjorn decides to make certain of my death by putting a knife in me, while I lie supposedly dying, I will be helpless to defend myself." "Not helpless," Elwyn countered. "Ragnar and the loyal warriors will be there, and I will be there as well. If Bjorn tries to kill you while you lie defenseless, he will reveal himself as a murderer and a traitor. Even his own supporters would turn against him then." "You would put yourself in danger for me?" Ericsson asked quietly, stepping closer to her. "After everything I have done, everything I represent?" Elwyn looked up at him. This strong, complex man who had destroyed her old life and somehow become central to her new one. "I told you before, my lord. I have chosen to look forward rather than back. And looking forward, I see that Ravensfjord needs you alive. The captives need you alive. I need you alive." The last words came out softer than she intended, carrying more emotion than she meant to reveal. Ericsson reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused warrior's palm warm against her skin. "When this is over," he said, his voice rough with feeling, "when we have dealt with Bjorn and his treachery, I want to speak with you about the future. Not as Jarl and captive, but as Ericsson and Elwyn. Will you grant me that conversation?" "If we survive," Elwyn replied, squeezing his hand briefly before stepping back. "But first, we must get through tonight. Now we need to find something harmless for you to actually drink, something that will let you perform a convincing collapse without actually poisoning yourself." Together, they worked out the details of their plan. Elwyn would prepare a mixture of water, honey, and herbs that would be harmless but could be presented as the poisoned mead. She would carry both cups, switching them at the crucial moment. Ericsson would drink the harmless mixture publicly, then stage a dramatic collapse that would draw Bjorn into revealing his involvement. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that seemed to promise bloodshed, the warriors began gathering in the great hall. They came armed, ostensibly out of respect for their dying jarl, but everyone knew that steel might be drawn before the night was done. The air was thick with tension and the smoke from the fire pit, creating an atmosphere that felt heavy and oppressive. Elwyn moved through the crowd carrying a tray with several cups. playing her role as a simple serving thrall. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady, her expression carefully neutral. She had lived through the destruction of her home, had survived 3 months of captivity, had learned to hide her thoughts and feelings behind a mask of compliance. Now, all those hard-learned lessons would be put to their ultimate test. Bjorn Splitnose had positioned himself prominently near the high seat, surrounded by his strongest supporters. He wore his finest war gear, the silver inlays on his axe catching the firelight. His expression was solemn, appropriate for a gathering to honor a dying jarl, but Aelwyn could see the barely suppressed eagerness in his eyes. He was a wolf waiting for the old pack leader to fall so he could claim dominance. Ragnar Blackbeard stood on the opposite side of the high seat, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He had positioned Tormund Oakshield and several other loyal warriors strategically around the hall, creating a protective cordon that could activate at a moment's notice. The old warrior's eyes met Aelwyn's briefly, and she saw that he understood something significant was about to happen, even if he did not know the details. The crowd quieted as Eriksson emerged from his chamber, supported on each side by thralls as if he could barely walk. His performance was masterful, his face pale and drawn, his steps faltering. He had somehow managed to make his powerful body appear frail, his broad shoulders hunched as if carrying an unbearable weight. As he slowly made his way to the high seat, several warriors looked away, unable to watch the transformation of their once mighty jarl into this shadow of himself. "My friends," Eriksson began, his voice barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear. "I have called you here to speak of the future. I know I am dying. I can feel it in my bones, in the weakness that grows stronger each day. Before I pass from this world to the next, I must ensure that Ravensfjord continues under strong leadership." He paused, breathing heavily as if the short speech had exhausted him. Aelwyn moved forward with her tray, offering him the cup of harmless mixture she had prepared. "My lord," she said softly, "drink this to give you strength." Eriksson took the cup with trembling hands, a detail that would have been invisible to most observers, but that Aelwyn recognized as part of his performance. He raised it to his lips and drank deeply, his throat working as he swallowed. Around the hall, warriors watched with expressions ranging from sympathy to barely concealed anticipation. "I have decided," Eriksson continued, setting the cup down with exaggerated care, "to name as my successor the man who has served me most faithfully, who has proven his worth in battle and in council. I name Ragnar Black." He never finished the sentence. With a gasp that sounded horribly real, Eriksson clutched at his chest and collapsed from the high seat, falling heavily to the rush-covered floor. The cup rolled from his hand, spilling the remaining liquid across the stones. For a moment, shocked silence filled the hall. Then chaos erupted as warriors surged forward, some crying out in dismay, others shouting for a healer. Aelwyn rushed to Eriksson's side, kneeling beside his still form and placing her hand on his chest. She could feel his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palm, could see the slight movement of his breathing, but to all observers, he appeared to be dying or already dead. "The Jarl is gone," someone shouted, and the cry was taken up by others, spreading through the hall like wildfire. Bjorn Splitnose stepped forward, his voice rising above the tumult. "This is a tragedy. Our great Jarl has fallen, but Ravensfjord cannot be without leadership. As his second in command, as the strongest warrior among us, I claim the right to lead until a proper council can be held." "You claim nothing," Ragnar roared, drawing his sword with a ring of steel. "The Jarl named me as his successor with his dying breath. All here heard it." "He named no one," Bjorn countered, his own weapon coming free of its sheath. "He died before he could finish speaking. The succession is open, and I am best suited to lead." The hall divided immediately, warriors drawing weapons and choosing sides. Steel gleamed in the firelight as men who had fought together now faced each other as enemies. Aelwyn remained kneeling beside Eriksson, her body shielding his as much as she could, praying that their plan would work before blood was shed. Then Ingrid's voice cut through the chaos, shrill with panic. "It was poison. The English witch poisoned him. I saw her give him the cup." All eyes turned to Aelwyn, and she felt her blood turn to ice. This was not part of the plan. Ingrid was trying to shift blame, to save herself by sacrificing the convenient scapegoat of an English captive. "No." Elwyn cried out, rising to her feet. It was not me. It was Ingrid who prepared the poison, who has been poisoning the Jarl for weeks. She acted on orders from... But she never got to finish. Bjorn moved with the speed of a striking snake, his sword coming up to point at her throat. Silence, thrall! You have killed our Jarl, and for that you will die. Will I? Came a strong voice from behind them, and every head turned to see Jarl Eriksson rising to his feet, no longer weak or trembling, but standing tall and powerful, every inch the warrior he had always been. It seems reports of my death were premature. The shock on Bjorn's face was almost comical, his jaw dropping open as he stared at the Jarl he thought he had killed. Around the hall, weapons lowered as warriors struggled to understand what was happening. What sorcery is this? Bjorn managed to say, though his voice shook. No sorcery, Eriksson said coldly, his ice-blue eyes boring into Bjorn with the intensity of a winter storm. Simply a trap, and you walked into it perfectly. You see, I have known for weeks that someone was poisoning me, and with the help of this brave woman, I have discovered not only who was administering the poison, but who ordered it done. He gestured to Ragnar, who moved quickly to seize Ingrid. The cook struggled, but she was no match for the old warrior's strength. Tell them, Eriksson commanded. Tell them who paid you to poison me, who promised you silver and safety if you helped remove me from power. Ingrid's face crumpled, tears streaming down her broad cheeks. It was Bjorn, she wailed. Bjorn Splitnose. He came to me months ago, said that the Jarl was growing weak, that new leadership was needed. He gave me the poison, told me how much to use. He promised me that when he became Jarl, I would be richly rewarded. Lies, Bjorn shouted, but his face had gone pale, and his eyes darted toward the doorway as if calculating his chances of escape. She is lying to save herself. I had nothing to do with this. Then explain this, Eriksson said, and nodded to Elwyn. She stepped forward, holding up the cup Ingrid had prepared, the one meant to be Eriksson's final drink. This cup contains poison, enough to kill a man within minutes. It was prepared by Ingrid on your orders, Bjorn, and given to Elwyn to deliver to me. We switched it for a harmless mixture, but the poison remains as evidence of your treachery. The warriors who had supported Bjorn began backing away from him, their expressions hardening. Attempted murder of a Jarl was the ultimate betrayal, a crime that could not be forgiven or overlooked. Bjorn found himself suddenly alone, surrounded by men who had been his friends only moments before. You have no proof it was me, Bjorn insisted desperately. Ingrid could have been working alone or with someone else. Could she? Eriksson asked. Then let us ask her. Ingrid, did anyone else know of this plot besides you and Bjorn? No one, my lord. Ingrid sobbed. It was only us. He said he would marry me when he became Jarl. Said we would rule together. I believed him, fool that I am. Bjorn's last hope died with those words. He could see it in the eyes of the warriors around him, the condemnation and disgust. In a final, desperate act, he lunged toward Eriksson, his sword raised for a killing blow. But the Jarl was ready, had been ready for this moment, and his own blade met Bjorn's with a clash that rang through the hall like a bell. They fought there in the center of the hall, and it quickly became clear that Bjorn was overmatched. Whatever weakness Eriksson had shown in recent weeks had been pure performance. Now, restored to full strength by Elwyn's healing teas and proper food, he fought with all the skill and power that had made him Jarl. His sword moved like lightning, each strike forcing Bjorn back, each parry reminding everyone present why Eriksson had ruled for 10 years. The fight ended quickly. Eriksson's blade found its mark, sliding between Bjorn's ribs with deadly precision. The traitor fell to his knees, his sword clattering from nerveless fingers, blood spreading across the rushes beneath him. For the crime of attempting to murder your Jarl through poison and treachery, Eriksson said formally, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, I sentence you to death. May the gods judge you fairly, though I suspect they will find you wanting. Bjorn Splitnose died there, on the floor of the great hall, his ambitions ending in blood and betrayal. The aftermath of Bjorn's death brought a strange calm to Ravensfjord, like the stillness that follows a violent storm. The warriors who had supported the traitor quickly pledged their renewed loyalty to Jarl Eriksson, their voices loud with protestations that they had known nothing of the poisoning plot. Eriksson accepted their oaths with the pragmatism of a leader who understood that holding grudges would only weaken his position. Unity was more important than revenge, at least for now. Ingrid's fate was decided quickly. She would be exiled, sent away from Ravensfjord with nothing but the clothes on her back, to make her way in the world as best she could. It was a mercy she did not deserve, but Eriksson was in no mood for more bloodshed. The cook was escorted to the settlement's boundaries the morning after the confrontation and told never to return on pain of death. For Elwyn, the days following the exposure of the conspiracy were disorienting. She had expected to feel triumph, perhaps relief that the danger had passed. Instead, she found herself adrift, uncertain of her place in this world she had helped save. The other captives looked at her with a mixture of awe and suspicion, unable to understand why she had worked to preserve the life of their captor. The Norse women treated her with grudging respect, but also with distance, as if she had become something other than a simple thrall. 3 days after Bjorn's death, as winter truly settled over Ravensfjord with heavy snows and bitter winds, Eriksson summoned Elwyn to his chamber. She had not seen him privately since the night of the gathering, and her heart beat faster as she made her way through the great hall. Warriors nodded to her as she passed, a gesture of acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable weeks before. She was no longer invisible, no longer just another English captive. She had become someone who mattered, and she was still learning what that meant. She knocked on the chamber door and entered at his call. Eriksson stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered settlement. He had regained the weight he had lost during his feigned illness, and his powerful frame filled the chamber with presence. He wore simple clothes, a tunic of undyed wool and leather breeches, but he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had survived treachery and emerged stronger. "You sent for me, my lord?" Elwyn said, standing near the door with her hands clasped before her. Eriksson turned to face her, and the expression in his ice-blue eyes was complex, layered with emotions she could not fully read. "I did. We have matters to discuss, you and I. Important matters that I have been delaying, but which can be delayed no longer." He gestured to the wooden stool near his sleeping bench. "Please, sit. This conversation deserves more than the formality of Jarl and thrall." Elwyn sat, acutely aware of the intimacy of being alone with him in his chamber, of the way the lamplight cast shadows across his strong features. She waited, her heart pounding, not knowing what he would say but sensing that this moment would change everything. "I made you a promise," Eriksson began, pacing slowly across the chamber. "I swore that if you helped me survive the conspiracy, I would grant you your freedom. I am a man of my word, Elwyn of Northumbria. You are free. From this moment, you are no longer a captive, no longer a thrall. You may leave Ravensfjord if you wish, and I will provide you with silver enough to make your way in the world, to return to your homeland if that is your desire." Elwyn felt as if all the air had been sucked from the chamber. Freedom. The word she had dreamed of every night since her capture was now being offered to her, and yet she found herself frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. She should have been overjoyed, should have been planning her journey home immediately. Instead, she felt only a hollow ache in her chest. "However," Eriksson continued, stopping his pacing to face her directly, "there is another path available to you, if you would consider it. Stay here, Elwyn, not as a captive, not as a thrall, but as a free woman of Ravensfjord. Stay as my advisor, my healer, my partner in ruling this settlement, and perhaps, if you could find it in your heart to forgive all that has passed between us, stay as something more." Elwyn's breath caught. She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or manipulation, but found only honest vulnerability. This powerful warrior, this Jarl who commanded hundreds of men, was offering her not just freedom, but a place at his side. The impossibility of it made her head spin. "You asked me to stay with the man who destroyed my home," she said quietly, not accusingly, but as a statement of fact that needed to be acknowledged. "To make a life with the person who killed my father, who brought me here in chains." "I do," Eriksson admitted, moving to kneel before her so that their eyes were level. "I know the weight of what I ask. I know that what I did to you and your people was cruel and brutal. I cannot change the past, Elwyn. I cannot bring back your father or restore your old life, but I can offer you a new life, one where you would be honored and valued, where your intelligence and courage would be put to use for the good of many." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, the hand of a warrior who had wielded sword and axe for decades. "More than that," he said, his voice dropping to something almost tender. "I can offer you my heart. such as it is. I have come to care for you, Aylwin, in ways I never expected and can barely understand. You are strong and clever and brave beyond measure. You challenge me, you surprise me, you make me want to be more than I am. I do not know if what I feel is what the skalds sing of in their love songs, but I know that the thought of you leaving, of never seeing you again, feels like a knife in my chest. Aylwin felt tears pricking at her eyes, emotions warring within her so fiercely that she thought she might break apart from the force of them. Grief for all she had lost, anger at the injustice of her situation, and beneath it all, growing stronger with each day she had spent in his company, something that felt dangerously like love. You ask too much, she whispered, though she did not pull her hand from his. You ask me to forgive the unforgivable, to love where I should hate. I ask you to look forward, as you once told me you had chosen to do, Erickson replied. I ask you to see not what I was, but what I might become with you beside me. I ask you to be brave enough to build something new from the ruins of what was destroyed. And if I cannot? Aylwin asked, tears now sliding freely down her cheeks. If the weight of the past is too heavy to overcome, then I will give you your freedom and my blessing, Erickson said firmly. I will arrange safe passage for you to wherever you wish to go, and I will live with the knowledge that I lost something precious because of my own past actions. But I hope, Aylwin, I desperately hope that you will choose to stay. Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of wind howling around the settlement. Aylwin looked at this man kneeling before her, this complicated mixture of violence and honor, of brutality and kindness. She thought of her father, of what he would say if he could see her now. Would he condemn her for even considering this path? Or would he, with his practical wisdom, tell her that survival sometimes required accepting difficult truths and making impossible choices? I need time, she said finally. This is not a decision I can make in a moment. There is too much to consider, too much to weigh. Erickson nodded, rising to his feet but not releasing her hand. Take all the time you need. But know this, Aylwin. Whatever you decide, you are free. That promise I made to you stands regardless of your choice. You owe me nothing. I owe you my honesty, Aylwin said, standing as well so that they faced each other in the lamplight. So I will tell you this. I do not hate you, Erickson. I thought I would, thought I should. But somewhere in these past weeks fighting beside you, learning to trust you, I found that I could not sustain that hatred. What I feel instead is complicated and confusing and frightening. It is not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not ever fully, but it is not hatred either. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. You have shown me honor when you could have shown me only cruelty. You trusted me when you could have doubted. You kept your word when you could have broken it. These things matter, Erickson. They matter more than I want them to, more than would be convenient for the anger I once carried. So I will think on what you have asked. I will search my heart and my mind, and I will give you my answer when I am certain of it. That is all I can ask, Erickson said, and she could see the hope in his eyes, even as he tried to contain it. In the meantime, you will move from the thrall's quarters to a private chamber. You are a free woman now, and you will be treated as such. You will eat at my table. You will be given proper clothes, and any who show you disrespect will answer to me. Over the following days, Aylwin's life transformed in ways both obvious and subtle. She was given a small but comfortable chamber near the great hall, with a real bed covered in furs, a brazier for warmth, and a wooden chest for her belongings. The other freed captives were moved there as well, a gesture from Erickson that made clear Aylwin's elevation in status was not unique. But it was Aylwin alone who was summoned to counsel with the Jarl on matters of settlement governance, who sat at his table during meals, who was consulted on decisions that affected the whole community. The Norse women of Ravensfjord watched this development with mixed feelings. Some resented her elevation, seeing it as an English captive being given honors she had not earned. Others, particularly the older women who had known hardship and understood survival, recognized strength when they saw it and accorded her a measure of respect. The warriors, taking their cue from Ericsson's treatment of her, were unfailingly polite, though Aylwin could feel their curiosity burning behind their formal courtesy. It was Ragnar Blackbeard who finally addressed the situation directly. He found Aylwin one morning as she walked through the settlement, her new woolen cloak wrapped tightly against the cold. "Lady Elwyn," he said, the title an acknowledgement of her changed status. "I would speak with you if I may." "Of course, Ragnar," Elwyn replied, curious about what the old warrior wanted to say. They walked together toward the edge of the settlement, where the wooden palisade met the cliff face and the view opened up to the frozen sea beyond. Ragnar was silent for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful as he gazed out at the ice-locked waters. "I have served Eriksson for 20 years, he said finally. "I knew him when he was barely more than a boy, when he first took up the sword. I have watched him grow from a hot-headed young warrior into the Jarl he is today. In all that time, I have never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you." Elwyn felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "I do not know what to say to that." "You need say nothing," Ragnar replied. "I simply want you to understand what you mean to him and what your decision will mean for him. Eriksson has been alone for a long time. He had a wife once, years ago, but she died in childbirth along with the child. Since then, he has focused only on being Jarl, on leading and protecting his people. He has had no time or desire for matters of the heart." The old warrior turned to look at her directly. "Until you have awakened something in him that I feared was dead. I see it in the way he speaks of you, in how his face changes when you enter a room. You have given him hope for something beyond duty and responsibility. That is a precious gift, Lady Elwyn, but it also carries great weight." "You think I should stay," Elwyn said. "It was not a question." "I think you should do what your heart tells you is right," Ragnar corrected. "But I also think you should know that if you stay, if you stand beside him not as captive but as partner, you will make him happier than he has been in all the years I have known him. And a happy Jarl is a better Jarl, one who rules with wisdom tempered by compassion rather than duty alone." He paused, then added more quietly, "I also think, from what I have observed, that you would not be entirely unhappy in such an arrangement yourself, but that is for you alone to decide." After Ragnar left, Elwyn remained at the cliff's edge, watching the seabirds wheel and cry above the frozen water. She thought about what the old warrior had said, about the weight of her decision not just for herself but for Eriksson, and, by extension, for all of Ravensfjord. She thought about her father, about the life she had lost, about the impossibility of the situation she now found herself in. But she also thought about the long conversations with Eriksson in his chamber, about the way they had worked together to uncover the conspiracy, about the respect he had shown her even when he had no obligation to do so. She thought about how it felt when his hand touched hers, about the way her heart lifted when she saw him, about the strange sense of belonging she had begun to feel in this cold northern settlement. That evening, as she prepared to bring Eriksson his now traditional cup of tea, Elwyn made her decision. She did not know if it was the right one, did not know if she would regret it in days or months or years to come, but she knew it was the only one she could make and still be true to the person she had become through all of this hardship and growth. She entered his chamber without knocking, a liberty she had earned through their partnership. Eriksson looked up from the documents he had been reviewing, his face lighting up at the sight of her in a way that made her heart clench. "I have made my decision," Elwyn said without preamble, setting down the tea and turning to face him fully. "I will stay, Eriksson. Not because you destroyed my old life and I have nowhere else to go, not because you are Jarl and I am afraid to refuse you, but because somewhere in these impossible weeks, I have found that I want to stay. I want to see what we might build together, what this new life might become." She moved closer to him, her green eyes meeting his blue ones without fear or hesitation. "I cannot promise you that I will ever fully forget what was done to me and my people. I cannot promise that there will not be days when the grief and anger return. But I can promise you this. I will try. I will try to build something good from the ruins of what was destroyed. I will try to be your partner in truth, not just in name. And I will try to let myself feel what I have been fighting against feeling since the moment I realized I cared whether you lived or died." Eriksson stood slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might shatter this moment. "Elwyn," he said, her name a prayer and a promise on his lips. "You honor me beyond what I deserve. I swear to you, I will spend every day proving myself worthy of this gift you give me." He reached out, cupping her face gently in his large hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized she was shedding. "May I kiss you?" he asked. and the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice even now, made Aylwyn's decision feel right in a way nothing else could have. "Yes," she whispered. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, tentative, as if he feared she might break or flee. But Aylwyn had not come this far, had not made this impossible choice, to hold back now. She wound her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the passion and confusion and desperate hope that filled her heart. This was not the ending her story was supposed to have. But perhaps, she thought as Eriksson pulled her closer, it was the beginning of a better one. Winter tightened its grip on Ravensfjord over the following weeks, bringing with it storms that howled like angry spirits and snow that piled high against the longhouse walls. The settlement turned inward, warriors spending their days maintaining weapons and equipment, women spinning wool and weaving cloth, children playing games by the fires while the elders told stories of gods and heroes. It was a time of waiting, of endurance, of surviving until spring would bring the return of raiding and trading seasons. For Aylwyn and Eriksson, the winter became something else entirely, a time of discovery, of learning each other in ways both profound and mundane. Their relationship was announced formally at the midwinter feast, when Eriksson stood before the assembled settlement and declared that Aylwyn of Northumbria would be his woman, his partner in ruling Ravensfjord. The announcement was met with mixed reactions, ranging from genuine happiness among those who had come to respect Aylwyn, to grudging acceptance among those who still saw her as an outsider, to barely concealed resentment from a few who believed a jarl should choose a Norse woman of proper lineage. But Eriksson's word was law, and his happiness was evident enough that even the skeptics held their tongues. The jarl, who had been growing weaker and more withdrawn for months, had suddenly returned to full vigor, his leadership stronger than ever. He made decisions with confidence, settled disputes with fairness, and planned for the settlement's future with an energy that reminded everyone why they had followed him for so many years. If an Englishwoman was the source of this transformation, then most were willing to accept her presence. Aylwyn moved into Eriksson's chamber permanently, a decision that required more courage than she had anticipated. She was very aware of being watched, judged, measured against standards she barely understood. The Norse culture was different from her own in countless small ways, and she had to learn quickly to avoid giving offense or appearing weak. Eriksson helped where he could, explaining customs and traditions, but there were some things she simply had to navigate on her own. One morning, about a month after their relationship became public, Aylwyn was summoned by Astrid Redhand, the most senior woman in Ravensfjord. Astrid was the widow of Eriksson's father's brother, a woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through any pretense. She commanded respect through sheer force of personality, and even the fiercest warriors treated her with careful courtesy. Aylwyn entered Astrid's longhouse with trepidation, unsure what to expect. The old woman sat by her fire, working on a piece of intricate embroidery that belied her age. She looked up as Aylwyn approached and gestured to a stool across from her. "Sit, child," Astrid said in Norse, her accent thick but her words clear. "We need to speak, you and I." Aylwyn sat, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, meeting Astrid's penetrating gaze without flinching. She had learned that showing fear or weakness in this culture invited contempt, so she projected a calm she did not entirely feel. "You have caused quite a stir in our settlement," Astrid began, her needlework continuing with practiced ease. "An English captive becoming the Jarl's woman. Some say it is a disgrace to our people. Others say Eriksson has lost his mind. What do you say to these accusations?" "I say that I care nothing for what others think," Aylwyn replied carefully. "I care only for doing right by Eriksson and by the responsibilities I have accepted. If others judge me harshly, that is their concern, not mine." A slight smile touched Astrid's weathered lips. "Good. A woman who lives by others' opinions will never be strong. But strength alone is not enough, especially for one who would stand beside a jarl. You must also be wise, and you must understand the people you now help to rule." She set down her embroidery and fixed Aylwyn with a look of such intensity that it felt like being examined by an eagle. "Tell me, child, do you love him? Or is this simply pragmatism, a captive making the best of her circumstances?" The directness of the question caught Aylwyn off guard. She opened her mouth to give a diplomatic answer, then stopped. Astrid deserved honesty, and Aylwyn found she wanted to give it. "I do not know if what I feel is love," she admitted. How can I when everything between us began with violence and captivity? But I know that I respect him, that I care for his well-being, that his happiness has become important to me. I know that when I am with him, I feel less alone than I have since my father died. Is that love? Perhaps not the kind the poets sing of, but it is real, and it is mine. Astrid nodded slowly, seeming satisfied with this answer. Love that grows from shared struggle is often stronger than love that comes easily. You have fought beside him, saved his life, proven yourself worthy of trust. These are foundations that will not easily crumble. But you must understand, child, that being a Jarl's woman is not simply about sharing his bed. You represent him to the people. They will look to you for guidance, for judgment, for leadership when he is away or occupied with warrior matters. I understand, Elwyn said, though the weight of it settled heavily on her shoulders. Do you? Astrid challenged. Then tell me this. There is a dispute between two families over grazing rights for their sheep. Both claim the same meadow. Both have some justification for their claims. Eriksson is away settling matters with a neighboring Jarl. How do you resolve it? Elwyn thought carefully, remembering the lessons her father had taught her about governance and justice. I would listen to both claims fully without interruption. I would examine any evidence they can provide, testimony from others who might know the history of the land. I would consider what serves the greater good of the settlement, not just the individual families. And if a clear answer does not present itself, I would propose a compromise. Perhaps the families share the meadow, alternating years or dividing it between them. The goal is not to make one side win and one side lose, but to maintain peace and fairness in the community. Astrid's eyes gleamed with approval. You have wisdom beyond your years and your experience. Your father taught you well, but understand this. Some in our settlement will never fully accept you, no matter how wise or fair you prove to be. You are English, a former captive, an outsider. They will look for any excuse to undermine you, to prove you unworthy. I know, Elwyn said quietly. I have seen it in their eyes, heard it in their whispers. Then you must be better than they expect, Astrid said firmly. You must be wiser, fairer, stronger than any Norse woman they could have imagined in your place. You must give them no cause for legitimate complaint. It is an unfair burden, child, but it is the reality of your situation. The old woman stood, moving to a wooden chest in the corner of her longhouse. She opened it and withdrew a beautiful cloak, deep blue wool decorated with intricate embroidery and silver thread. This was made for my daughter, who died before she could wear it. I want you to have it. Wear it at the next feast. Let the settlement see that you have my approval. It will not silence all criticism, but it will give pause to some. Elwyn stood as well, accepting the cloak with trembling hands. She understood the significance of this gift, the statement it represented. Lady Astrid, I do not know what to say. This is too fine, too precious. Nonsense, Astrid said briskly, though Elwyn could see emotion flickering in the old woman's eyes. You are the Jarl's woman now, and you will dress accordingly. Besides, I have watched you these past weeks. I have seen how you handle yourself with dignity, how you treat others with respect regardless of their station, how you make Eriksson happy in ways I have not seen since his wife died. You have earned this, child. Do not diminish your worth by false modesty. As Elwyn left Astrid's longhouse, the beautiful cloak folded carefully over her arm, she felt something shift inside her. She had been so focused on surviving, on navigating each day's challenges, that she had not fully accepted what her life had become. But Astrid's words had crystallized something important. She was no longer simply enduring her circumstances. She was building a life, creating a place for herself in this foreign world. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, she showed the cloak to Eriksson, telling him about her conversation with Astrid. The Jarl examined the garment with appreciation, his fingers tracing the intricate embroidery. Astrid does not give her approval lightly, he said, pulling Elwyn close. This is a significant honor. She was one of my father's most trusted advisors, and her opinion carries great weight in the settlement. If she has accepted you, others will follow. Not all of them, Elwyn pointed out, leaning against his broad chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. There are still those who resent my presence, who see me as an interloper. There will always be some who resist change, Eriksson agreed, his arms tightening around her. But you are winning people over, Elwyn. I see it in how they treat you now. compared to when we first revealed our relationship. You have proven yourself wise in counsel, fair in judgment, and strong in character. These things matter more than bloodline or origin. I hope you are right, Elwyn said softly, because I am committed to this path now, Erickson. I have chosen to build a life here with you, and I will not let small-minded prejudice destroy what we are creating. Erickson tilted her face up to his ice-blue eyes warm with affection. You are remarkable. Do you know that? You have taken circumstances that would have broken most people and transformed them into opportunity. You have turned captivity into freedom, loss into new beginnings. I am in awe of your strength. I learned it from you, Elwyn said, surprising them both with the admission. Watching you face the poison plot, seeing how you turned weakness into a trap for your enemies, observing how you lead with both strength and wisdom, it taught me things I never learned in my father's hall. You have made me stronger, Erickson, even as I hope I have done the same for you. They stood together in the warmth of his chamber, while outside the winter wind howled and snow continued to fall. In the great hall beyond, warriors and families gathered around the fires, sharing stories and laughter. The settlement was settling in for another long winter night, secure in the knowledge that their Jarl was strong and their future was stable. But even as Elwyn savored this moment of peace and connection, a small worry nagged at the back of her mind. Change, even positive change, often brought unexpected consequences. She had upset the established order by becoming Erickson's woman, had challenged assumptions about who could hold power and influence in Norse society. Not everyone would accept these changes gracefully, and she could not shake the feeling that challenges still lay ahead. Her instincts proved correct 3 days later, when a ship arrived at Ravensfjord despite the difficult winter conditions. It carried Jarl Halvard the Bold, ruler of a neighboring settlement, and a man known for his conservative views on tradition and proper Norse customs. He had come, he announced, to discuss important matters with Erickson, matters that could not wait for spring. Elwyn watched from the edge of the great hall as Halvard and his warriors were welcomed with the traditional hospitality. The visiting Jarl was a man in his 50s, broad and powerful despite his age, with a beard that fell to his chest and eyes that missed nothing. When those eyes fell on Elwyn, standing beside Erickson in the place of honor, she saw immediate disapproval. The feast that night was tense beneath its surface courtesy. Halvard made polite conversation, discussed trade and weather and the prospects for the coming raiding season. But Elwyn could feel his judgment, could sense that he was building toward something. It came near the end of the meal, when the mead had flowed freely and tongues were loosened by drink. I hear you have taken an English woman as your partner, Halvard said, his tone carefully neutral. An unusual choice, Erickson. Some might even say it shows weakness, allowing a former captive such influence. The hall fell silent, all eyes turning to the two Jarls. Erickson's expression remained calm, but Elwyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand tightened slightly on his drinking horn. I have chosen a partner who is wise, courageous, and capable, Erickson replied evenly. Her origin matters less to me than her character. Besides, it was her knowledge and quick thinking that saved my life when I was being poisoned. I would say that demonstrates strength, not weakness. But she is not Norse, Halvard pressed. She does not follow our gods, does not understand our ways. How can such a woman properly advise a Jarl on matters that affect our people? Before Erickson could respond, Elwyn stood. She knew this was a test, that how she handled this moment would define her position in the settlement and possibly affect relationships with neighboring Jarls. She had to be strong but not aggressive, confident but not arrogant. You are right, Jarl Halvard, she said clearly, her Norse flawless despite her accent. I am not Norse by birth. I do not follow your gods, though I have learned to respect them as you respect them. And I am still learning your ways, your customs, your traditions. But I would argue that this outside perspective has value. I can see things that those raised in your culture might miss, can offer solutions that might not occur to those bound by tradition alone. She moved forward slightly, her green eyes meeting Halvard's without fear. I saved Jarl Ericsson's life not because I am Norse or Christian, not because of my origin or my gods, but because I observed carefully, thought critically, and acted courageously. These qualities are not limited to any one people or culture. They are human qualities, and they are what I bring to my partnership with Erickson. Halvard studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh. a deep booming sound that filled the hall. "Well spoken, Englishwoman," he declared, raising his drinking horn. "You have fire in you, and intelligence besides. Perhaps Erickson has chosen more wisely than I thought. Tell me, can you also fight? Or is your courage limited to words?" "I can defend myself if necessary," Aylwin replied carefully. "My father ensured I knew how to use a knife at least, but I prefer to resolve conflicts through negotiation rather than violence." "A wise preference," Halvard agreed, his tone now genuinely respectful rather than challenging. "Though in our world, sometimes violence cannot be avoided. Perhaps while I am here, you would allow me to teach you some basic skills with a blade? A Jarl's woman should be able to protect herself in times of danger." Aylwin glanced at Erickson, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. "I would be honored, Jarl Halvard," she said. The tension in the hall dissipated like morning mist, conversations resuming with renewed energy. Erickson pulled Aylwin back down beside him, his hand finding hers under the table and squeezing gently. She had passed the test, had proven herself capable of handling challenges from powerful men without his intervention. It was another step toward establishing herself as a true partner, rather than simply an appendage to the Jarl's power. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Erickson pulled Aylwin into his arms, with a fierceness that spoke of pride and relief and love. "You were magnificent tonight," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The way you stood up to Halvard, the way you defended yourself and our partnership without showing fear or anger. You have no idea how proud I am of you." Aylwin relaxed into his embrace, allowing herself to feel the full weight of the evening's stress now that it was over. "I was terrified," she admitted. "My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone must hear it. But you did not let that fear control you," Erickson said, tilting her face up to his. "That is true courage, Aylwin. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. You have that courage in abundance." The winter gradually released its grip on Ravnsfjord as the weeks passed into months. The days grew longer, the snow began to melt, and the first brave shoots of green appeared in the sheltered places where the sun reached. The settlement stirred with renewed energy, warriors preparing their weapons and gear for the coming season, traders checking their goods and planning routes, farmers examining their fields and livestock. Spring brought hope and possibility, and nowhere was this more evident than in the transformation of Aylwin's position within the community. Jarl Halvard had stayed for 2 weeks, and true to his word, he had spent time teaching Aylwin basic swordwork and knife fighting. The training sessions had been watched by curious onlookers, and Aylwin's willingness to learn, combined with the respect Halvard showed her, had done much to cement her acceptance among even the most skeptical members of the settlement. When the visiting Jarl finally departed, he clasped forearms with Erickson in the warrior's gesture of equals and bowed respectfully to Aylwin. "You have a rare treasure in this woman," Halvard had said to Erickson. "Treat her well, or I may be tempted to steal her away for my own settlement." It had been said in jest, but the underlying respect was genuine. Word of Halvard's approval spread to other settlements, and Aylwin found that her reputation was growing beyond the boundaries of Ravnsfjord. She was becoming known not just as Ericsson's Englishwoman, but as a capable leader in her own right. As spring truly arrived and the ice broke up in the fjord, Erickson announced his intentions for the coming season. There would be no raids this year, he declared to the assembled warriors. Instead, they would focus on trade and building alliances. The settlement had grown prosperous under his leadership, and he wanted to secure that prosperity through peaceful means rather than constant warfare. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some of the younger warriors, eager for glory and plunder, grumbled about being denied the chance to prove themselves. But the older, wiser heads nodded in approval. Raiding was profitable but dangerous, and the loss of even a few good men could weaken a settlement for years. Trade offered steadier, safer returns. Besides, Erickson had added with a slight smile, glancing at Aylwin, "I have learned that not all valuable things are taken by force. Some are won through patience, understanding, and respect." It was during the preparations for the first trading voyage of the season that the final piece of Aylwin's past came back to confront her. A merchant ship arrived at Ravnsfjord, carrying goods from the south, and among the traders was a man Aylwin recognized immediately despite the months that had passed. He was Edmund, a young merchant who had been courting her before the raid. the man her father had been considering as a potential husband for her. Aylwin saw him before he saw her, and her heart clenched with a complicated mixture of emotions. Edmund represented everything she had lost, the life that had been taken from her. He was handsome in a refined way, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes, his clothes marking him as successful and prosperous. In another world, another life, she might have married him, might have been happy as the wife of a respected merchant. When Edmund's eyes finally found her across the crowded marketplace that had sprung up near the docks, she saw shock, disbelief, and then overwhelming relief cross his features. He pushed through the crowd toward her, his face alight with joy. "Aylwin," he called out in English. "Dear God, Aylwin, I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead." Before she could respond, he had reached her and pulled her into an embrace that was both familiar and uncomfortable. Aylwin stood stiffly in his arms, very aware of the eyes watching them, of Eriksson standing not far away with an expression she could not quite read. "Edmund," she said carefully, pulling back from the embrace, "I am surprised to see you here." "I have been searching," Edmund said, his words tumbling out rapidly. "After the raid, after we learned what happened to Linsworth, I could not accept that you were simply gone. I have been traveling to every settlement, every market, asking about English captives, and now I have found you. Thank God you are alive." He gripped her shoulders, his eyes bright with emotion. "Come, we must leave immediately. I have a ship, I can take you home. Your uncle still lives. He will be overjoyed to know you survived. Everything can be restored, Aylwin. Your life, your position, everything." Aylwin felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Home. The word carried such weight, such complicated meaning. For months she had dreamed of returning to England, of reclaiming her old life, and now that opportunity was being offered to her, and she found that she did not want it. "Edmund," she began gently, but he was not listening, too caught up in his own relief and plans. "I know it will take time to recover from what you have endured," he continued. "The horror of captivity, the degradation, but I want you to know that it changes nothing for me. I still wish to marry you, still want to make you my wife. We can return to England, start fresh, build the life we were meant to have." "Edmund, stop," Aylwin said more firmly, finally breaking through his flood of words. "You need to listen to me." Something in her tone made him pause, really looking at her for the first time. She saw him take in her appearance, the fine Norse clothing, the confident way she held herself, the respect with which the people around them treated her. Confusion crossed his face. "I am not returning to England," Aylwin said clearly. "This is my home now. These are my people, and I have chosen to build my life here." Edmund's face went white, then red. "What are you saying? Have they broken your spirit so completely that you cannot even recognize rescue when it comes?" "Aylwin, you are confused, traumatized. Come with me, and in time you will remember who you truly are." "I know exactly who I am," Aylwin replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I am Aylwin of Northumbria, daughter of Godwin, and I am also Aylwin of Ravensfjord, partner to Jarl Eriksson. I am both of these things, Edmund. I have not forgotten my past, but I have chosen my future." She saw Eriksson approaching through the crowd, his expression carefully neutral, but his body language protective. When he reached them, he placed a hand gently on Aylwin's shoulder, a gesture that was both possessive and supportive. "Is there a problem here?" Eriksson asked in English, his accent thick but his words clear enough. Edmund stared at the tall Viking warrior, at the easy familiarity between him and Aylwin, and understanding slowly dawned in his eyes. "You," he said, his voice shaking with anger and disgust. "You are the Jarl who led the raid on Linsworth. You killed Aylwin's father, destroyed her home, took her captive, and now you dare to touch her as if you have any right?" "I have every right," Eriksson replied calmly. "Aylwin is here by her own choice as my partner and equal. She is free to leave at any time, free to return to England with you if that is what she wishes. But I do not think it is." Edmund turned desperately back to Aylwin. "Tell me he is lying. Tell me you are still a prisoner, that you stay only because you fear for your life. I can protect you, Aylwin. I can take you away from all of this." Aylwin took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything, would close a door that could never be reopened. "He is not lying, Edmund. I stay because I choose to stay. I have built a life here, found purpose and meaning in this place. And I have found something else as well. She looked up at Eriksson, seeing the love and pride in his ice-blue eyes. I have found love, Edmund. Not the comfortable, convenient arrangement we would have had, but something real and hard-won and precious. She turned back to Edmund, seeing the pain and betrayal in his face, and feeling genuine regret for it. I am sorry, Edmund. I know this is not what you hoped to find, but I cannot be the person you remember anymore. That Elwyn died in the raid, and this new Elwyn has learned to live in ways the old one never could have imagined. I wish you well, truly I do, but my path lies here now. Edmund stood silent for a long moment, his face working through a series of emotions. Shock, anger, hurt, and finally, reluctant acceptance. I cannot understand this, he said quietly. I cannot understand how you could choose this life, these people, this man who destroyed everything you held dear. But I can see that you mean what you say, that this is truly your choice. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small leather pouch. Your uncle asked me to give you this if I found you. It contains your mother's ring, the one thing that survived the raid. He thought you should have it, whether you returned or not. Aylwin accepted the pouch with trembling hands, opening it to reveal a simple silver ring set with a small green stone. Tears sprang to her eyes as memories flooded back. Her mother wearing this ring, teaching her to read, telling her stories by the fire. It was a piece of her past, a connection to who she had been. Thank you, she whispered. Please tell my uncle that I am well, that I am happy, and that I hope he can forgive me for not returning. Edmund nodded stiffly. I will tell him. And I will tell the others in Linnsworth who survived that you live, though I suspect they will understand this choice no better than I do. He paused, then added more softly, Be well, Elwyn. I hope you find what you are looking for in this new life of yours. As Edmund walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of traders and merchants, Elwyn felt Eriksson's arm slip around her waist, pulling her close. She leaned against him, the ring clutched tightly in her hand, tears streaming down her face. Are you certain? Eriksson asked quietly. If you have any doubts, any regrets, tell me now. I will not hold you here against your heart's desire, Elwyn. If you wish to return to England, to reclaim your old life, I will let you go. Elwyn turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her world. I am certain, she said firmly. Edmund offered me my past, but you offer me my future. There is no choice to make, Eriksson. My place is here, with you, building something new from the ruins of what was lost. She slipped her mother's ring onto her finger, a bridge between who she had been and who she had become. Take me home, she said. Take me to our chamber, to our settlement, to our life together. That evening, as the sun set over Ravensfjord in a blaze of orange and gold, Eriksson called for a gathering in the great hall. The entire settlement assembled, filling the long benches and standing along the walls, curious about what their jarl would announce. Eriksson stood before them, Aylwin at his side, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the hall. My friends, my people, you have watched over these past months as Aylwin has proven herself worthy to stand beside me. She saved my life when I was being poisoned. She has shown wisdom in counsel and courage in adversity. She has earned the respect of Jarl Halvard and the acceptance of Lady Astrid, and today she chose to remain with us even when offered the chance to return to her former life. He turned to Aylwin, taking both her hands in his. Before all of you, I declare that Aylwin is no longer simply my partner. From this day forward, she is my wife in all but formal ceremony, my equal in ruling this settlement, and she will be treated with all the honor and respect due to that position. Any who show her disrespect show it to me. Any who question her authority question mine. She is one of us now, fully and completely. A roar of approval went up from the assembled crowd, warriors pounding their fists on tables, women ululating in the traditional cry of celebration. Aylwin felt overwhelmed by the acceptance, by the warmth of their response. These people who had been her captors were now her community, her family, her home. Ragnar Blackbeard stood, raising his drinking horn high. To the Jarl and his lady, he called out, may their partnership bring prosperity to Ravensfjord and wisdom to our council. May their love be as strong as the mountains and as enduring as the sea. To the Jarl and his lady, the crowd echoed, drinking deeply. As the celebration continued into the night, with music and stories and laughter filling the great hall, Aylwin and Ericsson slipped away to their chamber. In the quiet privacy of their own space, away from the festivities, they held each other close. "Thank you," Aylwin whispered, "for giving me the choice, for understanding what I needed, for being patient while I found my way to this moment." "Thank you," Ericsson replied, "for choosing me, for choosing us, for having the courage to build something new instead of clinging to what was lost. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible, Aylwin. You have given me hope for a future I had stopped believing in." They made love that night with a tenderness and passion born of mutual choice and deep understanding. There was no longer any shadow of captivity between them, no lingering doubt or guilt. They were simply two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and chosen to build a life together, despite all the obstacles in their path. In the days that followed, Aylwin threw herself fully into her role as Ericsson's partner in leadership. She worked with the other women to organize the settlement's resources, mediated disputes with a fairness that won her respect, and began teaching some of the children to read and write, introducing them to knowledge from both Norse and English cultures. She also continued her healing work, using her knowledge of herbs and medicine to tend to the sick and injured. Ericsson, for his part, found that having Aylwin beside him made him a better leader. Her different perspective helped him see solutions he might have missed. Her compassion tempered his warrior's instinct to resolve everything through strength, and her intelligence challenged him to think more deeply about the consequences of his decisions. Together, they began to transform Ravensfjord from a settlement that survived primarily through raiding into one that prospered through trade and diplomacy. It was not a popular change with everyone, particularly the younger warriors who still dreamed of glory in battle. But Ericsson held firm, supported by Aylwin's counsel and the backing of the older, wiser members of the community. One warm spring evening, as they walked along the cliffs overlooking the sea, Aylwin stopped and turned to Ericsson with news that would change everything once again. "I am with child," she said simply, her hand moving to her stomach. "Your child, our child. A new life born from the joining of two worlds." Ericsson's face transformed with joy so pure and complete that it took Aylwin's breath away. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, then setting her down gently, as if she were made of glass. "A child," he breathed, his hand covering hers on her stomach. "Our child. Aylwin, you have given me everything. My life, my happiness, and now this. I do not deserve such gifts." "Yes, you do," Aylwin said firmly. "You have earned them through your honor, your love, and your willingness to change and grow. This child will be a symbol of that growth, Ericsson, a bridge between Norse and English, between the past and the future we are building together." As the seasons turned and Aylwin's pregnancy progressed, the settlement watched with interest and anticipation. The child growing within her represented more than just an heir to the Jarl's position. It was a symbol of unity, of the possibility of building something new from the ashes of conflict. When winter came again, bringing with it the first pains of labor, Astrid and the other experienced women gathered to help Aylwin through the birthing. Ericsson paced outside the chamber like a caged wolf, terrified by memories of his first wife's death in childbirth, desperate for any word of Aylwin's condition. But this birth was different. Aylwin was strong, and she fought through the pain with the same determination she had shown in everything else she had undertaken. When the baby's first cry rang out, clear and strong, Ericsson burst into the chamber to find Aylwin exhausted but smiling, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "A son," Astrid announced proudly. "Strong and healthy, with his father's size and his mother's spirit from the sound of those lungs." Ericsson knelt beside the bed, his warrior's hands trembling as he touched the soft down of his son's hair. "He is perfect," he whispered, looking up at Aylwin with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "You are perfect. I have never been so terrified or so happy in all my life." "What shall we name him?" Aylwin asked, knowing that the name would carry significant meaning in this culture. Ericsson thought for a long moment, then said, "Godwin, after your father. Let him carry that name forward. Let him be a bridge between your people and mine, just as you said, and let him grow up knowing that he is loved beyond measure, the son of a warrior and a woman who was brave enough to forgive." Elwyn felt fresh tears spring to her eyes at the generosity of this gesture, at Ericsson's willingness to honor the man he had killed by giving his name to their son. Godwin Ericsson, she said, testing the name. It sounds right. It sounds like a new beginning. As spring returned once more to Ravensfjord, bringing with it the promise of new growth and new possibilities, Aylwin stood on the cliffs with her son in her arms and Ericsson at her side. She looked out over the settlement that had become her home, at the people who had become her family, and at the man who had become her everything. The journey from captive to free woman, from enemy to beloved, from loss to new beginning had been long and difficult. There had been pain and grief, anger and fear, moments when she had thought she could not continue. But she had endured, had grown, had transformed herself and everything around her through sheer force of will and courage. "Do you ever regret it?" Ericsson asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "The choice you made, the life you left behind?" Aylwin looked up at him, this strong, honorable man who had given her so much more than he had ever taken away. "No," she said with absolute certainty. "I regret the violence that brought us together, regret the pain and loss that could not be avoided. But I do not regret choosing you, choosing us, choosing this life we have built together. This is where I belong, Ericsson. This is home." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, while their son made small contented sounds between them, and the settlement below continued its daily rhythms of life and work and community. The past could not be changed, could not be erased or forgotten, but the future stretched before them bright with promise. Built on a foundation of love hard-won and freely given, Aylwin of Northumbria, now and forever Aylwin of Ravensfjord, had found her place in the world, and in finding it, she had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the truest destinations, that forgiveness can transform both the forgiven and the forgiver, and that love, when it is real and earned and chosen, can overcome even the deepest divides. The Viking Earl had been poisoned, and the captive Englishwoman had discovered everything, including the truth about herself and the capacity of the human heart to heal, to hope, and to love again. Their story would be told for generations in Ravensfjord, a tale of courage and transformation, of justice and redemption, of two people who found each other in the darkest of circumstances and chose to build light together. And as the sun set over the fjord, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Aylwin smiled, content in the knowledge that she had not just survived her trials, but had transcended them, had turned captivity into freedom, loss into gain, and hatred into a love that would endure as long as the northern stars shone bright in the winter sky.